I never thought I'd come home to find out someone had actually crossed the line this far. We've all dealt with nosy neighbors or that one HOA Karen who thinks she runs the entire community. But this time she went way too far. While I was out running errands, she decided to sneak onto my property and even let herself inside my home without permission. It was like she believed my house was just another one of her HOA projects she could control. But what she didn't know is that she wasn't alone inside. My trained K9, who's not only my loyal companion, but also a certified protector, was already waiting. The moment she stepped inside, everything changed. The air in the house was still, but the sound of the door clicking shut was enough to alert my dog. From that second, the situation wasn't in her hands anymore. She thought she could snoop around, maybe snap pictures, or try to dig up something she could take back to the HOA board. But instead, she found herself face to face with a K9 who doesn't take kindly to strangers trespassing. I can only imagine the look on her face when she realized she was trapped in someone else's home, with nowhere to run and a pair of sharp eyes locked on her every move. It's one thing to argue over fences, gates, or yard decorations, but stepping into someone's private space is another level of disrespect. And this time, she picked the wrong house. What happened next is something I never expected, and honestly, it left the entire neighborhood talking. But before I get into that part, let's just say this was the exact moment where her HOA power trip finally came to a screeching halt. To really understand how things reached this point, you have to know a little about the history between me and this HOA. From the very first day I moved in, it felt like they were watching every single thing I did. If the grass grew half an inch too high, I'd get a warning. If I parked my truck in the driveway instead of the garage, I'd get a letter. And of course, Karen was always the one leading the charge. She'd march up and down the street, clipboard in hand, acting like she owned the place. Most neighbors just ignored her, but for some reason, she always had her sights set on me and my property. Things escalated when I installed security cameras and a reinforced gate. She claimed I was ruining the community's aesthetic, but in reality, she just hated that I had boundaries she couldn't control. Every time she lost an argument, she seemed to come back with a new way to push harder. That's why it didn't completely shock me when I discovered she had crossed into my home. It was shocking in the sense that it was bold and reckless, but with the way she'd been escalating, maybe it was only a matter of time. The wildest part is, she didn't just wander in randomly. Looking back, I realized she must have been waiting and watching. She knew when I left, and she saw her chance. What she didn't account for was my K9 unit, who is trained not just for protection, but for loyalty. He's the kind of dog who can sense the difference between a welcome guest and an intruder. And the moment she stepped over that line, his instincts kicked in. The tension in that moment was unlike anything else, and what unfolded next would leave everyone stunned. Inside that house, the standoff between Karen and my K9 wasn't just about one person trespassing. It was about years of built-up tension finally snapping. Karen had always acted like rules didn't apply to her, like she could twist the HOA bylaws to serve her own agenda. But standing in my living room with a trained dog holding her attention, she was no longer the one in control. Every second must have felt like an hour for her, waiting, not sure if the next move she made would set him off. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, whispers about her behavior had already started to spread. People were tired of her bullying, but they were also afraid to challenge her. Some thought she had too much influence with the HOA board. Others just wanted to avoid drama. My story wasn't just about one incident. It tapped into something deeper, something that every homeowner who's ever felt cornered by an overreaching HOA could relate to. This wasn't just my fight. It was everyone's quiet frustration being brought into the open. What made it even more complicated was the possibility that she wasn't acting alone. I'd caught glimpses of other board members lingering near my property in the past, almost as if they were waiting for her lead. Was this just Karen's idea of snooping gone too far? Or was she trying to dig up something the entire board could use against me? That thought added a whole new layer to the conflict, because if this was part of a bigger plan, the situation wasn't going to end with one trespass. In that moment, my K9 stood as the only barrier between Karen and whatever she thought she'd find. And the question that still hung heavy in the air was, what exactly was she after? As I pulled into the driveway that evening, I noticed something that immediately set my nerves on edge. The front door, which I always made sure to lock before leaving, was slightly ajar. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but the moment I heard the muffled sound of my dog barking from inside, I knew exactly who had taken it upon herself to cross the line. My heart started racing. Karen wasn't just snooping outside anymore. She had stepped straight into my home. I moved quietly, not wanting to startle the situation any more than it already was. From the hallway, I could hear the low growl of my K9 echoing through the living room. He never growls unless he feels danger, and that told me everything I needed to know. Karen was cornered, standing in the one place she should have never been. I could almost picture her, frozen in place, realizing she had finally lost control of the game she'd been playing for months. The intensity of the moment was overwhelming. My dog's claws clicked softly against the floor as he paced, never taking his eyes off her. Every movement she made, even the slightest shift, made his growl deepen. I knew he wouldn't act unless I gave the command, but Karen didn't know that. To her, this was a standoff she couldn't win. The strange part was that instead of leaving the second she realized she was caught, she seemed determined to linger, like she was searching for something. Her eyes kept darting toward my desk, my shelves, even the framed papers on the wall. Whatever she was after, it wasn't random, and the closer I got, the clearer it became. This wasn't just trespassing. It was something far bigger. The real question was, how far was she willing to go? Just as I stepped fully into the living room, I noticed something that shifted the entire mood. Karen wasn't just panicked. She was clutching a folded envelope in her hand, one I immediately recognized. It was from the stack of legal documents I kept on my desk, papers tied to the very property dispute I had been fighting with the HOA for months. Somehow, in the middle of her trespass, she had managed to dig through my things and grab something she thought could give her leverage. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her snooping anymore. This was evidence of a deeper scheme. Her eyes flicked between me, the dog, and the papers as if she was debating whether to hide them or use them as a weapon in her power play. That's when it hit me. She hadn't come alone earlier. The faint sound of a car door closing outside told me someone else had been here, maybe even helping her. My security cameras might have caught them, but inside, all I had was the sight of Karen standing in my house with proof that she was after more than just petty control. The air grew heavier as my K9 held his ground, his growl steady, warning her with every breath not to make a move. Karen's hand trembled, but her expression hardened, like she believed she had the upper hand simply because she had those documents. I could almost see the plan unfolding in her mind. Take what she could, spin it to the HOA board, and finally push me out. But what she didn't expect was that I wasn't backing down. With the stakes raised higher than ever, the real battle wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about exposing how far she and the HOA were willing to go. The room felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge. Karen clutched the envelope tighter, my K9 never breaking his stare, and I finally stepped forward. My voice was calm, but firm as I told her to drop what she had taken. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself, caught between her obsession with control and the reality that she was in someone else's home with no way out. My dog's growl deepened, and with a shaky breath, she finally loosened her grip and let the paper slip to the floor. That should have been the end of it. But what came next caught both of us off guard. As I bent down to grab the envelope, the sound of another voice came from the doorway. One of the HOA board members was standing there, clearly having followed Karen in, but too late to escape unnoticed. It was proof that she hadn't been acting alone. He froze the second he saw me, realizing the plan had unraveled, and for the first time, Karen's confidence shattered completely. I kept my focus, calling my K9 back to my side, his protective stance never wavering. The tension was thick as I confronted them both, demanding to know why they thought they could cross such a line. Neither had an answer that made sense, just excuses and nervous glances. By then, the truth was obvious. This wasn't about enforcing HOA rules. It was about power, about finding any way to push me out and take control of what wasn't theirs. As they scrambled to leave, the twist came. In their rush, Karen dropped another folder from her bag, one filled with notes, photos, and plans that hinted at a much larger scheme involving other neighbors' properties. Suddenly, I realized my fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting everyone from what the HOA had been plotting all along. When I finally had the folder in my hands, everything started to make sense. Page after page showed just how far the HOA, led by Karen, had been pushing their agenda. There were maps with markings on different properties, lists of violations that didn't even exist, and even notes about ways to pressure certain homeowners into selling. It was bigger than a petty feud. This was a coordinated effort to take over the neighborhood one step at a time. That revelation turned my frustration into resolve. I secured the documents, called local authorities, and handed over the evidence. While Karen and her board allies scrambled to explain themselves, the truth was too clear to ignore. The fact that they had trespassed into my home and been caught red-handed with my legal papers left them with no way to spin the story in their favor. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began speaking up, sharing their own experiences of intimidation and manipulation. For the first time, the board's grip on the community started to crack. As for my K9, he became the hero of the story. If it weren't for him, Karen might have walked away with those documents unnoticed. Instead, he stood his ground and reminded everyone why loyalty and protection matter more than any HOA rulebook. In the end, Karen was removed from her position, and the board was forced to face serious scrutiny. The whole ordeal taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the fight isn't just about fences, gates, or letters in the mailbox. It's about standing up for your rights and protecting what's yours. And while the HOA tried to use fear and control, it was truth, persistence, and one very watchful K9 that finally turned the tables.